Bullies tried to humiliate the new black teacher. After 1 minute, they were begging for mercy. When Amara Johnson first pulled into the parking lot of Riverside High School, the morning sun painted the red brick walls in gold. It was her first official day as a teacher, something she had dreamed of since she was 16, back when she used to volunteer at her community library, helping kids who couldn't afford private tutors. For her, teaching wasn't just a job. It was a mission, a way to give back what the world had once denied her. Amara had worked hard for this moment. A graduate of Columbia University's School of Education, she carried with her years of research, passion, and personal resilience. She wasn't the kind of teacher who lectured from a distance. She wanted to connect, to challenge, to make every student feel seen. But as she stepped out of her car that morning, her heart fluttered between excitement and unease. Riverside High had a reputation, a prestigious suburban school where most students came from families with influence, legacy, or wealth. Amara had heard whispers from other educators about its culture, how privilege often walked louder than kindness, and how diversity hires were treated with silent skepticism. She didn't want to believe that. Not yet. She told herself that passion and professionalism would speak louder than prejudice. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Walking through the hallway, she could feel eyes following her. Some are curious. Some were surprised. A few cold and assessing. Her tailored navy suit and confident posture stood tall against the buzz of teenage energy. She smiled at a group of students near the lockers, but they only whispered and turned away. In room 204, the English literature classroom that would now be hers, the desks were neatly arranged in rows, a faint smell of chalk and old books lingering in the air. She wrote her name on the whiteboard, Ms. Johnson. The marker squeaked slightly as she drew the final stroke. It felt symbolic, a declaration that she had arrived, that she belonged here. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine how this year would go. Discussions about classic literature, debates on morality, lessons that would push her students to think beyond grades and comfort zones. Maybe, just maybe, she could help shape a new generation of thinkers, ones who saw humanity before hierarchy. But that hopeful image began to fade the moment the first group of students filed in. Brandon Keller entered first, his confidence bordering on arrogance. He was the kind of student who didn't need to earn attention. It followed him automatically. The Keller name was well known in the city. His father, Richard Keller, owned one of the largest luxury car dealerships in the state, and their family photos often appeared in society magazines. Brandon walked as if the world were built for him. Behind him came Sophie Lang, perfectly styled and always performing for invisible cameras, and Emily Shaw, the quiet academic type, known for her sharp tongue disguised under politeness. Together, they were the kind of trio who ruled social hierarchies, deciding who was in and who wasn't. Amara greeted the class with a calm smile. She introduced herself, shared a little about her background, and invited them to write down what literature meant to them. But as she turned to the board, she heard a faint snicker, then a louder laugh. The sound grew. Brandon's voice carried over the room, laced with mockery. Though she couldn't make out every word, she caught enough to understand. The phrase diversity hire sliced through the air like a hidden blade. Her chest tightened, but her hand didn't tremble. She finished writing, turned slowly, and met their eyes with quiet composure. It wasn't the first time Amara had been underestimated. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than anger. So she didn't scold or defend herself. Instead, she looked at each student, one by one, as if she could see beyond their laughter, beyond their privilege, to the insecurities that fueled it. The room fell quiet again, though not from respect, more from confusion. They couldn't tell if she hadn't heard them or simply refused to give them power. By the end of her first day, the tension had settled beneath the surface like a quiet storm. She could sense it, whispers in the hallways, looks exchanged during lunch, the subtle exclusion in the teacher's lounge where some staff avoided conversation with her. Yet, she remained professional, collecting small observations the way a detective collects evidence. In the evenings, she stayed late grading assignments and reorganizing lesson plans, determined to prove that her worth didn't need defending. But even as she worked, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was being plotted. What Amara didn't know was that Brandon Keller and his friends were already preparing to test her limits. To them, she wasn't just a teacher, she was a target. The new black teacher who didn't belong in their world of manicured privilege and silent bias. They had no idea that the same woman they mocked for being out of place was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The next few days would push every ounce of patience and strength she had. There would be whispers that turned into posts, jokes that turned into cruelty, and a campaign of humiliation that would spread beyond the classroom walls. But what none of them saw coming, what even Amara herself couldn't yet imagine, was that their cruelty would end up exposing their own darkness. That the woman they tried to break would rise to hold a mirror to their privilege, their prejudice, and their hypocrisy. Because beneath her calm voice and kind eyes, Amara Johnson carried something none of them understood, the power to turn humiliation into justice. And soon, Riverside High was about to learn that sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the loudest truth. For the first few days, Amara Johnson tried to keep her head down, focusing on her lesson plans and her students' faces rather than their whispers. But it didn't take long for the murmurs to turn into something sharper, something calculated. Brandon Keller, the ringleader with the entitled smirk and a last name that carried power in the city, decided she was an easy target. He'd been raised in a house where power meant immunity, and in that classroom, surrounded by laughter and privilege, he believed he owned the air everyone breathed. It started small, sarcastic comments under their breath, exaggerated yawns during her lectures, mocking laughter every time she turned to the board. Sophie Lang, daughter of a city councilwoman, made sure her disdain was public, her voice dripping with fake politeness every time she called Amara Miss Equality. Emily Shaw, quiet but cunning, weaponized her intelligence, interrupting lessons just to corner Amara with smug corrections. It wasn't learning they wanted. It was dominance. Every class became a test of endurance. Each glance, each whisper, was a reminder that in their eyes, she was less than what her title said. And yet, Amara never raised her voice. She corrected, guided, and smiled, not out of weakness but out of control. Because she knew that silence often frightens those who expect chaos. Still, the attacks escalated. Sophie created a private Instagram page called Equity Experiment Gone Wrong, where she secretly posted photos of Amara grading papers with mocking captions, "Diversity higher in her natural habitat." Brandon edited clips of her lectures into TikToks that made her look like a clueless teacher fumbling for words. Emily fed the narrative by spreading rumors that Amara's degree was donated, a cruel echo of the racism masked as humor. But Amara wasn't the only one watching. Dr. Aaron Chen, the quiet history teacher who had seen generations of arrogance pass through those halls, noticed the pattern immediately. He remembered the same laughter years ago, laughter directed at him when he was called the diversity hire in the teacher's lounge. He didn't forget. He had simply learned when to step in. Every day after school, Amara stayed late, not because she needed to, but because she couldn't go home knowing she'd been mocked in silence. One afternoon, as the hallways emptied and the sunlight dimmed through the windows, Dr. Chan appeared at her door with a folder in his hand. He didn't say much, just placed it on her desk. Inside were screenshots, message threads, and posts, all evidence of the students' campaign against her. Amara flipped through the pages slowly. Every cruel word, every emoji, every insult was there in black and white. But instead of anger, a faint smile crossed her face. She looked up at Dr. Chun. He nodded once, as if to say, "Now you have everything you need." The next morning, Brandon's arrogance reached its peak. He bragged to his friends that his father, the owner of Keller Motors, was already contacting the principal. "She'll be gone by Friday," he said confidently. "My dad said they're turning this place into a circus with all their hiring." Sophie laughed, agreeing to bring her mother, the councilwoman, to the parent meeting. Emily offered to gather more evidence of Amara's supposed incompetence. They didn't realize the noose of their own making was tightening. That Thursday, the meeting took place behind closed doors. A group of well-dressed parents, all with polished smiles and practiced concern, demanded that Principal Harris review the teacher's qualifications. They called it professionalism. It was prejudice in a suit. When word reached Amara, she didn't panic. Instead, she wrote one phrase across her lesson plan for the next day: narrative consequences. The students arrived on Friday morning expecting a meltdown. Brandon swaggered into the classroom with his mother, Catherine Keller, who took a front-row seat with 3 other influential parents. Their presence was supposed to intimidate, but Amara's calm presence unsettled them instead. Her smile was steady, her tone cheerful as she set a small box on her desk and powered up the projector. "Today," she said softly, "we're going to study what happens when one story tries to erase another." As the projector flickered to life, the room dimmed. Then came the first image, a screenshot of Sophie's Instagram group, "Equity experiment gone wrong." A murmur rippled through the room. Brandon's smirk vanished. Amara scrolled slowly, revealing post after post, name after name. The silence grew heavy, the kind that exposes rather than protects. Catherine Keller stood, voice trembling with outrage, demanding to know what this was. Amara didn't answer. She clicked again. The next slide showed emails between Richard Keller and the principal, suggesting the school should reconsider its progressive direction. Then, a newspaper headline appeared: "Keller Motors under federal investigation for tax evasion." The room froze. Brandon's mother went pale. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For a moment, no one breathed. But Amara wasn't done. The next slides displayed Sophie's history of offensive posts, Emily's cruel private messages about scholarship students, and finally, a quiet reminder at the bottom of the screen: "The internet never forgets what we choose to hide." Her voice stayed calm, her tone controlled, as she ended the presentation. "Some lessons aren't taught from books. Some lessons are lived, and today you've learned one of them." The bell rang, but no one moved. Brandon stared at the floor, his confidence shattered. Catherine Keller stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots down the hall. Amara turned off the projector, her heart racing. Not from anger, but from release. Yet deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. She could feel it, the storm was only beginning. Because while humiliation burns fast, accountability burns slow. And when it catches, it consumes everything in its path. Amara had just lit the match. The aftermath of that Friday morning presentation spread through Riverside High like wildfire. Whispers turned into gasps, gasps into rumors, and by lunchtime, every student and teacher had heard about what had happened in room 204. For some, it was shocking. For others, it is long overdue. But for Brandon Keller and his friends, it was the unraveling of the world they thought they controlled. By the next day, the Keller family's lawyer had contacted the school board, claiming Amara Johnson had violated student privacy. A formal complaint was filed. Suddenly, the teacher who had exposed injustice was now being painted as the aggressor. Online, anonymous comments began flooding in, calling her unprofessional, angry, and unfit to teach. The same system that had ignored her suffering was now questioning her right to stand up for herself. For Amara, the days that followed were suffocating. Every headline, every social post twisted the story just enough to make her the villain. Parents whispered at the gates. Students avoided her gaze. Yet, amid the chaos, she didn't waver. Because buried in her desk drawer was the full truth. Everything Dr. Aaron Chun had collected and every document she'd verified herself. She knew what she'd done wasn't revenge. It was exposure. and exposure always makes the guilty panic. That Monday morning, Amara arrived to find a formal letter waiting for her. "You are hereby placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Her chest tightened. The hallway that once echoed with laughter now hummed with quiet judgment. As she packed her belongings, she glanced at the classroom door, the one she had walked through so confidently just weeks before. Students peered in through the window, their eyes wide, unsure whether to pity or fear her. Dr. Chun met her outside. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "Truth has consequences," he said, "and not everyone's ready to face them." He handed her another envelope, this time from a local journalist who'd been following the story. Inside was a printed draft of an upcoming article titled, "Riverside High Teacher Faces Backlash After Exposing Racist Bullying." The subtitle, however, told a different story. Community divided, accountability or overreaction? Amara read it twice. Her name, her students, even her words were there, distorted, rearranged, repackaged for clicks. That's when the fear turned into something else. Not despair, but resolve. She realized the fight was no longer about one classroom. It was about who got to define the truth. Meanwhile, in the Keller mansion, panic had replaced arrogance. News cameras parked outside their gates after the IRS investigation into Richard Keller intensified. Reporters shouted questions about the tax evasion case, about the racist emails leaked from the school. Inside, Brandon's mother was on the phone, pleading with contacts, trying to fix the narrative. But no one could undo what the world had already seen. Brandon, once invincible, sat alone in his room, scrolling through comments under a news post that read, "Millionaire son suspended for racist bullying." His friends had gone silent. Sophie's parents had pulled her out of school to avoid the media frenzy. Emily's scholarship recommendation had been revoked. The empire of privilege they'd built on silence was collapsing, and Amara's name was on every headline. The following week, the school board summoned Amara for a hearing. The room was cold, lined with stern faces pretending neutrality. Catherine Keller sat at one end with her lawyer, eyes sharp, voice dripping with accusation. They called Amara reckless, disruptive, and a threat to student morale. She listened quietly, every word echoing the same tone she'd heard from that classroom on her first day. When it was her turn to speak, Amara stood slowly. Her hands didn't shake. She opened her folder, revealing every piece of evidence. The racist posts, the mocking videos, the private messages. She laid them out one by one, the proof undeniable. "If telling the truth disrupts your comfort," she said, her voice calm yet unyielding, "then comfort was built on the wrong foundation." The room fell silent. Even the superintendent, who'd been avoiding eye contact, leaned forward. Amara continued, showing that every post she exposed had been publicly available, every name verified. "I didn't humiliate anyone," she said quietly. "They humiliated themselves. I just turned on the lights." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Catherine Keller stood, her voice rising in anger. "You've ruined my family's name," she shouted. Amara turned to her, her expression steady. "No," she said softly. "Your actions did." The hearing ended without resolution. The decision would take days. But that night, something unexpected happened. The journalist who had once written that slanted article released an updated story, this time with the full evidence Amara provided. The headline changed, "Teacher targeted after exposing racist bullying. Truth finally revealed." The public narrative flipped overnight. Comments poured in, not of condemnation, but of support. Teachers, parents, and even strangers began sharing her story, calling her a symbol of courage. By morning, Amara's inbox overflowed with messages from educators across the country. People who had faced the same quiet discrimination, the same isolation, the same choice between silence and survival. And now they had proof that standing up could work. The school board reconvened that afternoon. The superintendent cleared his throat, voice uneasy but firm. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "we have reviewed the evidence. You are reinstated, effective immediately." Gasps filled the room. Dr. Chun exhaled slowly, relief washing over his face. But Amara didn't smile. She wasn't thinking about winning. She was thinking about what came next. Because now, her fight wasn't just hers anymore. She gathered her folder, looked up at the panel and said quietly, "This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of accountability." Outside the building, cameras flashed. Microphones surged forward. Voices shouted her name. For the first time, she didn't shy away. She looked straight into the lens, calm, steady, unbroken. And as the lights hit her face, one thought echoed in her mind. They tried to humiliate me in front of the world. Instead, the world saw them for who they really were. But what came after that moment? No one, not even Amara, was prepared for. The weeks that followed Amara Johnson's reinstatement changed Riverside High forever. The school that had once turned a blind eye to privilege and prejudice was suddenly forced to look at itself in the mirror. Policies were rewritten, meetings were held, and conversations that had long been avoided finally began to take shape. Teachers whispered her name in the hallways, not in pity, but in quiet respect. Students who had once laughed now looked down when she passed, not out of shame alone, but out of realization. Amara didn't celebrate her victory with noise. She returned to room 204 like nothing had happened, setting down her books, cleaning the board, and beginning another lesson. But this time the atmosphere had shifted. The same walls that once held mockery now carried an unspoken reverence. Every word she spoke seemed to echo louder, not because her tone changed, but because her truth had weight now. The consequences for those who tried to destroy her came swiftly. Brandon Keller's suspension turned into an expulsion after further evidence of online harassment surfaced. His family's influence couldn't shield him anymore. His father, Richard Keller, was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for tax evasion. The mansion that once towered as a symbol of power was sold to pay off legal fines. Catherine Keller, stripped of her influence, moved into a modest apartment on the same street where Amara grew up. Sophie Lang's dreams of becoming a social media influencer ended when brands and sponsors severed ties, labeling her as a liability. Her mother's political career, once untouchable, fell apart under public backlash for her history of anti-equality votes. Emily Shaw lost her scholarship to Stanford Bay University after the university reviewed her digital footprint. The same cruel posts she thought no one would ever see. The laughter that once filled the classroom had turned into silence, replaced by the sound of accountability. But for Amara, it wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. She didn't just expose racism. She documented it, analyzed it, and turned it into a lesson plan. With Dr. Aaron Chen's help, she developed a framework for confronting prejudice in schools, one rooted in facts, reflection, and empathy. They called it the Johnson Framework. Within months, it spread beyond Riverside. Over 200 schools adopted it. Teachers used it to address bullying, bias, and inequality with evidence rather than emotion. And slowly, students began to change. At Riverside High, the results were undeniable. Reports of racial harassment dropped by 90%. Minority enrollment in advanced placement courses doubled. For the first time, students of color weren't just surviving in that building, they were thriving. Room 204, once a battlefield, became a symbol of dialogue and healing. 6 months later, Amara stood on a stage at a national education conference. The same woman who had once been humiliated in front of a classroom now stood before thousands of educators, policymakers, and journalists. Behind her, on a massive screen, the words read, "Facing Bias, A Teacher's Guide to Real Accountability." Her book, part memoir, part manifesto, had become a bestseller. She spoke not of anger, but of growth. Accountability isn't revenge, she told the audience. It's education. It's the process of showing the world who we really are, not through accusation, but through truth. Her voice trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from emotion, because she knew she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every teacher who had been doubted, every student who had been silenced, and every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. When she finished, the room rose to its feet. Applause thundered like a storm. For the first time, Amara allowed herself to breathe deeply, not because she had won, but because she had finally been heard. Months later, she received a message on LinkedIn. It was from Brandon Keller. His words were careful, unsure, but sincere. He told her he had been in therapy for 4 months, volunteering at a community center for underprivileged kids. "You weren't trying to destroy me," he wrote. "You were trying to teach me, and I finally understand." Amara read his message twice before replying. Her answer was short, but it carried the weight of everything she'd lived through. True growth begins with full accountability. Keep going. Not for me, but for everyone you'll meet. Years later, Amara became regional director for the National Center for Inclusive Education. From her office overlooking the city, she often thought back to that first day. The laughter, the humiliation, the sting of injustice. And every time she smiled. Because from that moment of cruelty, something far greater had been born. A movement, a framework, a reminder that change starts when someone refuses to stay silent. She once said, "The best revenge isn't in destroying those who hurt you. It's in building something strong enough that they can't hurt anyone else again." And that's exactly what she did. Today, her story is taught in universities as the Keller case, a turning point in educational accountability. 2 states even passed legislation inspired by her methods. What began as one teacher's stand became a national blueprint for justice. So what does this story teach us? That silence protects no one. That truth, even when it shakes the ground beneath us, rebuilds stronger foundations. And that sometimes the most powerful revolution begins not with anger, but with a lesson. Because when you teach the world how to face its prejudice, you don't just change a classroom. You change the future. So what did you think about Amara's story? Her courage, her strength, and how she turned pain into purpose. It's something we can all learn from. Would you have done the same if you were in her place? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if the story moved you, inspired you, or even made you think twice about justice and equality, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more people can hear her message.